Thank you. For Oxnard Airport Authority, Supervisor Long.
Here.
Supervisor Ramirez.
Here.
Councilmember Perallo.
Here.
Chair Lopez.
Here.
Vice Chair Fussell. Thank you. And for the record, alternate public member Mark King.
Here.
Thank you very much. Both airport authorities have a quorum.
Thank you. And can I just, a quick reminder for everybody, if you're not talking, to mute yourself. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. Are there any changes to the agenda? Hearing none.
This is Director Freitas. We do
Josh. Okay.
Nothing? Okay. Move on to approval of minutes. And it looks, well, we have two sets of minutes to approve. So we'll start with Camarillo.
I move that we second.
Okay, so I have a motion by Mayor Malche and a second by Mr. Bear. Can we vote, please? Roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Long.
Yes.
Supervisor Ramirez.
Yes.
Mayor Molche.
Yes.
Chair Santangelo.
Yes.
Vice Chair Bear.
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Chair Lopez, you want to take Oxnard?
Thank you, Chair Santangelo. Okay, so we have the minutes for March 10th and April 8th. If there's any additions, changes, or recommendation.
I'll motion to approve. This is Supervisor Long.
I'll second. Ramirez.
Thank you. So a motion by Supervisor Long and a second by Supervisor Ramirez. Can we take a roll vote, please?
Yes. Supervisor Long.
Yes.
Supervisor Ramirez.
Yes.
Councilmember Perallo.
Yes.
Chair Lopez.
Yes.
Vice Chair Fussell.
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Okay. So we'll move on to public comments, and these are for comments. These are comments on items not on the agenda today.
Correct. May I make an announcement to the public?
Please.
If you would like to be added to the, if you would like to be added to the public comment queue, please be connected via Zoom. If not already connected and wish to make a public comment, you can find the Zoom link on the last page of the meeting agenda, which can be found at vcairports.org/meeting-calendar. If you wish to make a public comment on agenda item number 5, please press the raise hand button now, or if you're calling in today, press star then 9 to be added to the speaker queue. Thank you.
And we do have two members of the public with their hands raised. And we do have at least one written comment.
Those are separate agenda.
Separate agenda items. Okay. Then we will start with Ben Benedetto, and I will promote you to a panelist. And I see you are ready to go. So you have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. I do have comments on agenda items C, D, and E, which obviously I'll reserve until those come up. But my non-agenda item has to do with the advisory board, not the authority board. I've been on the last 2 or 3 board meetings, and a couple of meetings ago, it appeared that they really don't follow the Brown Act very precisely, nor even Robert's Rules of Order. And I just wanted to make a point that 2 meetings ago, when they were nominating and voting board officers, commissioners as officers, they voted for a gentleman that wasn't there, wasn't in nomination, didn't put his name in nomination for vice president of the board. And they not only put the nomination, but they elected him. And I don't really think that's how the Brown Act is supposed to work. Also, their rationale was that he had done the job before and had done a good job, and he'd probably be okay with it. In the last meeting, where there was public comments on some of the non-agenda items, on the agenda items when they moved to the agenda, they actually the chairman, the president of the board said, well, we're not going to take any more public comments because the meeting's running long. She didn't limit the comments to a shorter period of time. She didn't bother to check with the staff to see if there are any written comments. In that conversation, it was obvious that most of these board members have been on that board for a very long time, president for over 20 years. And it just doesn't seem like they're taking the job all that seriously. So I don't know who appoints these folks. I assume city, county officials appoint them. I know the newest member on the board, Steve Tannehill, was appointed by Supervisor Ramirez. And I also noticed that the board seems to be a little short with Mr. Tannehill during the meeting. So I would just suggest that they take a better look at the Brown Act, that they take a better look at the Robert's Rules of Order, and they run a little tighter meeting. And I'd really like to know how many of those folks have been there for 20 years. I mean, I appreciate their service. It's all well and good, but there are other folks, and the representation should change along with the community. They're not appointed to the Supreme Court. So that's all I have to say, and I'll make my other comments when the agenda items come up. Thank you for letting me speak.
All right, next to speak is, who came over? If you're ready to speak, oh, it's David Cronshaw. I need to promote him. And as soon as he comes in, we'll get him fired up. David, if you can hear me, you can unmute, show your video if you like. You have 3 minutes.
I'm great. Thanks, Dave, for promoting me. Always an honor. Thank you, Camarillo and Oxnard Airport Commission. Thanks for the time. Name is David Cronshaw, resident of Oxnard, and one of the neighborhood council members who manually, on a daily basis, we manually track the Oxnard Airport flight training. And just a couple of observations. In the last 2 months, we've seen with our tracking data, there's probably been about a 35 to 40% increase in the number of training flights that are actually originating directly out of Santa Monica, Van Nuys, or Whiteman airports. This is a new trend, which we think it's really interesting, and that members should be aware of this, that over the last 2 years we've been tracking, we have not seen this amount of traffic directly from Van Nuys. Tonight there was 3 or 4 that came directly up from Van Nuys at about 4 o'clock. So these training flights many of them are newly registered aircraft, many are older aircraft, and they're actually registered to individuals out of LA, not from flight schools. So they're based down at these LA airports, and they're now practicing their T&Ds over Oxnard. So we thought we'd bring that up. There was also a case made in the full package today from the Department of Airports, where it was saying that the comment was made in the package that the T&G operations have not increased in the past 30 years, which is against our data, which shows there's been a large increase in the past 2 years. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up. Also, the justification that the training activity has been trending up since the last recession, the biggest contributor is because from the noise complaints over the last 2 years has been associated with workforce changes, i.e. many individuals working remotely. We don't think that's, really possible. Not everybody's working remotely on the weekends when we're seeing the big increase in TNG. So we really think that it would be really important, and I know, Dave, you're working on it, to have one single database for all of this tracking, so it's not kind of us versus them kind of thing. Make it publicly available so we can view the data, who is who, the origination, training type. Is it a career training or is it a hobbyist? And we think the database would be really helpful so that we're not having to kind of do different kind of data and observations with the training. So thank you for the time. I appreciate it. And thank you very much.
All right, and Chair, we have no other members of the public wishing to speak.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you both for your comments. We will move along to new business, and I'm going to hand it back over to Chair Lopez.
Madam Chair,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to, just a point of information, if I could. Mr. Di Benedetto mentioned Mr. Tannehill. Yes, I did appoint him, but he's not appointed to the authorities. He is appointed to the advisory board, just for clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Perello, I see your hand up too.
Thank you very much, Ms. Santangelo. 3 points. I'd like to know, is the county council in attendance at this meeting?
Yes, Tom Temple is on with us tonight.
Okay, I'd like to get an answer to the first public comments, whether it can be done tonight or at the next meeting, ASAP. Number 1, are the rules of the elections being followed in the organization of what the comment of the first public speaker? I have no idea if he's accurate or not, but I think it warrants an investigation by county council, not members of this board, to get a straight answer back to us, specifically with respect to the Brown Act. And then I know from previous meetings, the posting of the agenda, when there was a comment made about starting and stopping, there have been times when there are following organizations that meet in the same room and they have a starting time, and these agendas have been posted with the start and stop time. So I'd like to get those questions answered by the county council, either tonight or at the next meeting, or sooner than the next meeting. Thank you very much, Chair, for letting me speak.
Of course. Mr. Temple, do you want to respond to that now or at all?
Well, Madam Chair, I'm expecting an answer. As an airport authority, when we have somebody bring something up like that, that's a serious matter to this member of this Oxnard Council.
I'm happy to take a look at that and let you know anything that I learn.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments before I move along? Okay, Chair Lopez, resume.
Thank you, Chair Santangelo. So the next item on the agenda is the consideration of resolution number 9, authorizing the remote teleconference meetings. Do we have any comments, questions from authority members or the public? Okay. Is there a recommended action?
I would move the recommended action.
I'll second that.
Thank you. So we have a first by Councilmember Perello, second by Supervisor Ramirez. Can we take a roll vote, please?
Supervisor Long,
Yes.
Supervisor Ramirez,
Yes.
Councilmember Perallo,
Yes.
Chair Lopez,
Yes.
Vice Chair Fussell.
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Great. Thank you. I'll hand it back to you, Chair Santangelo.
You're muted. You're muted, Susan.
Thank you. All right, so the same resolution for Camarillo. Any changes, or do you want to move ahead with a motion?
I'll move the suggested action.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Mayor Molche and a second from Mr. Bear. Let's have a roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Long,
Yes.
Supervisor Ramirez,
Yes.
Mayor Molche,
Yes.
Chair Santangelo,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bear.
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. And now we will move on to, I believe the rest of the agenda are joint. So we're just gonna go through to the next subject, which is review, discuss, and provide direction to staff as to format and content of the draft voluntary noise abatement procedure pilot guide. I will hand it over to whoever is taking this one.
Chair, this is Director Freitas. I'll start and just give some background, and then I'll kick it to Dave Nafee from our office, who's done some great work on this. So as you've heard over the last at least several years, we've got some noise issues around Oxnard Airport. We do as well for Camarillo Airport. So one of the items we wanted to upgrade along with our website, at least initially, is a pilot guide. And this is something that we can send out to pilots in the area, to flight schools in the area, to kind of help them, guide them in ways to be the best neighbors at both of our airports. So we're starting with Oxnard. That is a higher level of noise concern for us right now. So we're starting with kind of the format for Oxnard, and we will follow the same kind of format. Obviously, it would be slightly different for Camarillo, but we're looking for thoughts and input from this committee, from pilots and whatnot. And so we're vetting it through our Aviation Advisory Commission as well as the authority. So looking for thoughts and input. Doesn't have to be tonight, but digest this and share this with your folks, as we do with our tenants, our businesses, our community members. I sat with Channel Islands President Walter earlier this week, and we went through some ideas and thoughts. He might even be on the line tonight, and some ideas he thought, at least from the community neighborhood perspective. So those are the kind of things we're looking for, and looking for your input. Dave, if you would like to kind of go into it a little bit detail.
Sure, happy to. Chair and members, what we have here is 2 pages, and I'll flip to the next one as well. That together, front and back, would be a handout or something to put into a pilot briefing, or something that we can have on our website. All 3 actually. And what this does is provide a good overview of the way we can do a better job of flying friendly over and near our airports. And this replaces a document that was in place about 10 years ago, and providing some updates to it graphically. And based on some information that we'd heard, so a comment made by a member of the neighborhood association to the southwest, the impression that person had was that the diagram that you see in blue arrows was meant to show exactly over the ground where the airplanes would fly, and that diagram showed a much tighter track over the ground, and it was really meant to be representative. So rather than that's exactly where the airplanes are going to fly and nowhere else, it was really just indicating the direction that the loop goes for each particular phase of flight. So what we've done here is to update graphically with later imagery, and make the arrows and the tracks on the ground better represent with the way we'd like to see aircraft, if possible, if physically able to do it, fly over the tracks over the ground. So we provided this to the Airport Advisory Commission Monday last, and had some thoughts from them, and those together with what we hear tonight, and following comments that you may wish to provide, feed those back to our consultant who's assisting us with the development of these. The backside of this, I would just point out, is more of an oblique angle to better visualize where you are over the ground, where it is that so you get some better situational awareness. There's also some handy information here that replaces or updates the old pilot guides information. In some cases, the names have changed, the numbers have changed, and et cetera. So to make this better valuable to our pilot community, that's what this is. So I will yield. I think Director Freitas gave a good overview of the purpose, and those are a couple of the features. And so delighted to hear your feedback.
Okay, thank you for that report. And I see Mr. Bear, you've got your hand raised.
I do. I wanted to thank Director Freitas and his staff for compiling these documents. I think they're going to be helpful as a pilot. I'm thrilled to see all the data that's here that will allow people to fly friendly, while at the same time ensuring that their efforts are done safely. Safety obviously has to be a paramount concern. I think a lot of work has gone on into this, and I think it's a really good start. I'm very supportive of the department's efforts to be responsive to the community. And hopefully this is a good first step in that process.
Okay, Mr. Sanada, I think you were next.
Yes, 2 points I'd like to bring up. Number one, I would hope that, first of all, I think this is a great idea. And I think most pilots are very appreciative to know what is expected of them in order to be friendly to the community. We need to keep in mind, however, that this is controlled airspace, controlled specifically by Oxnard Tower. And the tower is going to give directives that will oftentimes cause a pilot to extend his downwind or not fly this specific pattern for purposes of maintaining separation between aircraft, particularly during congested time periods. So I hope that we don't put out to the community that this is exactly what's going to take place every day with every flight. Number two, I think a key challenge is to make sure that not only local pilots have this information, but pilots flying in from out of town. And I think the latter is going to be the more challenging one. And I'm wondering if it's possible to post this information under NOTAMs for Oxnard Airport. Every pilot knows before flying to an airport that he needs to check the NOTAMs, the notice to airmen regarding information about that airport that they should be apprised of. So that's just a question I'm posting to maybe you, Keith.
And I'll quickly answer that. The answer is no, we can't put it on NOTAM specifically, but there's others, as a pilot, other places we can put it, our website and other things like that, so that when pilots are coming in for, gathering information about where they're going, we can get them that way.
Supervisor Long.
Yes, I also just want to say thank you for putting this together. Hearing from our community members, I think more communication, the better, in regards to what the flight routes are and what we expect of our pilots, and so that our constituents, our neighbors, can also know what is required of our pilots. In the public comment, there was a comment in regards to airspace. Other planes from other places coming through the area. Do we have control of that? Because my understanding is that we don't. And so I just wanted to ask that question. Maybe Keith or Dave could answer that for me, please.
Yes, I mean, from the county's perspective, we do not have, federal, airspace is federally controlled. So as pointed out by committee member Sandana, air traffic is the director of where you go and how you fly per se. So we don't have control over, there are many airports in the area, and, the beautiful coast that we live next to, pilots are flying just along the coast. It's gorgeous to do that, but it's also, a visual as they're flying along, mountains and coast are easy things to follow. So those are all normal things that they do.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the clarification. I believe that community members out there might not know that. They think an airport will control everything around the county and our airports. And as heard just now, it confirmed that it is not. But I think that this program here is showing what is really important for our pilots when they take off from our airports, what we are requiring from them. So with Oxnard Airport, I really do appreciate it. And it's a working relationship between our neighbors and our pilots to make sure that this airport stays open. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Chair, we do have 4 members of the public who have indicated they'd like to speak. Okay, we have Mr. DiBenedetto, Barb Filkins, Mike Alfred, and Charles. So we'll go in that order. Mr. DiBenedetto, you may unmute, and you have 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much. One bit of housekeeping. Walt Hagedorn is the chair of the Oxnard Shores Neighborhood Council, not the Channel Islands Neighborhood Council. We've been tracking the flights and sending spreadsheets to various people. I think a lot of you folks have been getting them. First of all, we are encouraged that this map and this study is going on, and we welcome obviously as much participation from all facets of everybody in the neighborhood involved that we can get. There are a couple of issues with the map as it is now. One is that when they take off and turn left, to turn left prior to the estuary, the stuff that we've tracked, the average left turn looks to be take up about 1,600 feet, about a quarter mile. And so they'd have to start their turn much before the estuary in order to complete that pattern. And we don't see a difficulty with that. And most of the stuff that we've been tracking, we understand that at some time air traffic could create some safety issues and there'll be some exceptions, but most of them are about 700 feet altitude, about midway between Victoria and the canal. The other is that when they fly out and turn south, many times they veer. They don't wait to get to the beach or the water to make the left. So they're going over Oxnard shores when they do that. And the other issue is that when you just get your feet wet and turn left, you're flying about 200 feet from all the beachfront homes and about 400 feet from the rest of the neighborhood. So not really good for noise abatement. I would suggest that on exiting traffic, if they do fly to get their feet wet, that their course is plotted farther out before they turn left to exit the area so that they don't end up flying back over the noise abatement area. A better suggestion, if it's at all possible, would be have exit traffic turn right, just like you have when the circumstances allow it, just like you have on the right turn pattern for the touch and goes. A couple of issues that we're going to have coming up are going to be the development at North Shore at the end of the runway there at Harbor and 5th. The DEIR Environmental Impact Report which was updated in 2019 says that there will be no overflights from the airport. So an exit pattern flying straight to get your feet wet and turning is going to be an issue. If not now, certainly later on. And I think we could be better served. We could take care of that all in one swell swoop, so to speak. The other issue is you have a Teal Club development coming. You have Portofino development that's trying to come in. So the airport's going to be squeezed. I think this is a really good opportunity for us to take a holistic look at this problem. Again, thank you for the time, and I'll speak to you on the next turn.
Very well. Next up is Barb Filkins.
Actually, I want to make a comment on Mr. Benedetto. Turning right doesn't always work. You're right down the throat of departures from Camarillo. I will leave it at that. But I do have a suggestion. I think this is a good visualization. And I don't know if Mr. King has anything to add to this, but my comment would be, it would be good to look at some of the classes of aircraft that we're looking at. This is totally achievable with a 150, a 172, and a 182, but some of the faster and hotter classes of aircraft might have some difficulties. So things like a slightly higher pattern or a different turning radius might be worthwhile. And also the case of the light twins. End of comment.
All right, very well. And next is Mike Alfred. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Very good. My name is Mike Alfred. I'm the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association representative for Oxnard Airport. I'm an instrument-rated pilot, private pilot with about 40 years and thousands of hours of experience. I own a private hangar at Oxnard Airport, and I keep my airplane there, and I enjoy flying my Piper aircraft out of Oxnard. I've always been a conscientious pilot. I follow the rules for safety and noise abatement. I know what the rules are for Oxnard and Camarillo, and I follow them as best as possible, providing it'll always be safety, number one. When I'm flying my plane, I am the pilot in command, and safety as specified by the FAA is my number one concern. I've lived in Camarillo area and flown out of Oxnard for about 22 years and have seen a lot of changes, including many more homes near the airport than when I first came here. That means that there are some rules about noise abatement that will need to be reviewed, but they cannot outweigh the rules for safety for pilots and their passengers and people who live near the airport. Twins and high performance singles fly the pattern at higher speed by design and require a larger pattern, a wider pattern. You can't really be turning steeper this close to the ground than about 30 degrees of bank when you're in the pattern without affecting safety. Left traffic is the common practice. It is directed by the FAA as the go-to pattern direction nationwide because it is safer. Pilots are used to flying left traffic, and they naturally would go to that. The pilot sits on the left side of the cockpit, just like the driver in cars nowadays in all of the United States. In both cases, it is for safety, okay? He or she can see other planes and traffic much better sitting on the left-hand side of the airplane or the vehicle. Now, have you ever driven a right-hand drive English car on American highways? Well, I have. I had an old Jaguar that came over from England. It was a right-hand drive. And I can tell you, yes, it is legal and can be done, but it is not as safe. So whether it's a car or a plane, having the best visibility is the key. And when you're turning, being in the left pilot seat, it is much safer to be doing left traffic. Pilots do not deliberately want to bother our fellow citizens of Oxnard or Camarillo. We live here too. We pilots can and will work with the airport to optimize noise reduction, but cannot at the expense of safety. Now, for example, maybe we could raise the pattern another 100 or 200 feet, which would reduce noise, but that needs to go through the FAA and be evaluated by them. It's not something we can do independently. Air traffic control prefers planes on the left pattern because they have a lot of traffic on the right pattern side coming out of Camarillo, coming out of Santa Paula, coming down from Santa Barbara, and so on. And it gives them
Mr.
better
Alfred,
safety.
if you could wrap up real quick, that'd be great, please.
Yeah, it gives better safety by the controllers in the tower by having a left pattern traffic there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And next is Charles.
Charles Mclaughlin, can you hear me?
Hi, Charlie.
How you doing? As an introduction, I've operated out of Oxnard since 1977. Presently, we have 17 aircraft here. We're the major operator on the airport. We have a mix of airplanes and helicopters. We have about 50 employees. We run about $3.5 million in payroll. Of that, probably $750,000 is given to the city and the county in taxes and fees. We fly about 6,000 to 8,000 hours a year out of the airport. About 60% of our operations are from Vandenberg to San Diego geographically. Tomorrow morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, we'll have 2 aircraft over Vandenberg for the Starlink launch out of Vandenberg. Most of our local support is covering all the Channel Islands for the National Park Service and the Navy operations at Point Magoo, North Island, and China Lake. We also have an agricultural section. We support the farms and ranches from Point Conception to the LA County line. Last week, we did our yearly survey for the National Marine Fisheries to identify crab traps that are endangered to gray whale migration, plus identifying leatherback turtles up in the Monterey Bay area. In addition, we are heavily involved in supporting wildland fires with the U.S. Forest Service, CAL FIRE, and occasionally Ventura County. We were actually the first aircraft, or we were assigned by Ventura County to fly during the day before or the day of the Thomas Fire. And 3 months later, we were the last helicopter to be relieved by the U.S. Forest Service when it was contained up in Santa Barbara. We're extremely diverse. We have missions. We have one mission of an aircraft on the East Coast. We're supporting the New York Bight and the Boston Aquarium for over 5 years up there, surveying for the endangered right whale, excuse me. I could go on for hours and mention how many airline pilots we've produced out of this airport. We have accomplished this through training. And the backbone of aviation is what you might refer to as elementary training, starting and learning the structure of airport patterns, takeoff and landings. After you graduate, work on instruments and approaches, and it's designed for safety and conformity. This produces skilled labor, and this is what we need. Like I mentioned, an advisory council, we must be cognizant is not to discourage or penalize aviation training for what it produces. It is just, it's unfortunate that there's a neighborhood that's feeling a little, and I hate to use the word harassed, but it's for sure not intentional. And we should be able over time to mitigate this. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Walter Hagedorn is the last of the public members to come through Zoom, and then Anna will have one to read as well. Walt, go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Walter Hagedorn. I'm the chair of the Oxnard Shores Neighborhood Council, and I'd like to comment on the noise abatement map. First, we're glad to see that the right traffic pattern is now a viable option for planes to do touch and go landings. Currently, the majority of those planes are going left and coming over Oxnard Shores. There are some concerns about the map itself, just technical things. First, that as it's shown, if you cannot reach 700 feet, you go out over the ocean, you make a 130-degree turn, you fly over the homes on Mandalay Beach, and then you leave the neighborhood. That makes no sense to me. I don't know where those planes are going to go, but I feel there's something wrong in that. Someone has to ask, is that correct? Secondly, if they are going to do that, they should just go out further over the ocean, turn 90 degrees and leave. The other thing is that they say they're supposed to turn, achieve 700 feet at the canal or by the canal and turn before the canal. But if they do that, a plane has a turning radius. Many of these Cessna 172s, it's about 1,600 feet. That means you're 16 feet past the canal by the time you're on your downwind leg and you're flying straight over Oxnard Shores. The third thing is what we're talking about, the environmental impact report for the North Shores. The city of Oxnard wanted that development done, and it promised the people, and you can go read it. It said, we are not going to fly left. We are going to fly right. And they, even in the land use plan, and you can go read it, it's the one that's current. It says that they were directing planes from 7 to 8 in the morning to a 270-degree heading, that's 20 degrees to the right, from 7 to 8. And from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., they were directing them 5 degrees off at 255, still to the right. And that is what is in the land use plan. It's what's in the EIR. So when people say we can't do that, I just ask you, you promised the people that you would do that. So we need to have some discussion on all these promises that were made. And a lot of people, a lot of the development that's done around the airport now, the city wants it done. And this is in direct conflict with what the airport is doing. So we need to have an honest discussion on how, if the city wants to do development and still wants to have an airport, we want to have everybody happy. We have to have a discussion. We can't just say, oh, that this is a great training facility and everything else. Things are not working. We do have to have a discussion about this. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We do have another commenter, and that is find a minute. Oh, it's Matt Johnston. And let me reset this here so that stops flashing. And Matt, you have 3 minutes.
Well, hopefully I don't take the full 3 minutes, but good evening. Thanks for allowing my comment. I wanted to make some comments first to the efforts of the airports and even the communications that we're all having regarding noise around the Oxnard Airport. I'm the president of California Aeronautical University. We operate our main location out of Bakersfield, California, but we do have a flight center in Oxnard, and we operate 2 aircraft out of the Oxnard Airport, and we take a lot of conscientiousness towards working with the community and hearing the community. We receive phone calls as a flight school in unorganized fashions where just upset community members or things of that nature feel they want to take it in their own hands and make a call. So I do appreciate that there's more of an organized effort to have a good, common sense, rational conversation. And I think that's the key here. Everybody wants to work together. No one wants to intentionally harm or make more noisy anything to any community member. I've lived in the community for over 17 years, and I've been able and fortunate to operate out of the Oxnard Airport with my personal aircraft and benefit from my family's use of the airport. And we at our university and our flight training capacity do use the federal airspace and the public airports, both locally and distant. And I think it's important to note that, there's communities all over the country that have airports near them. And we're fortunate in this public use of airports to benefit from a lot of good economics that the community benefits from our postal services or packages and all these types of things that leave these airports. And I just want to, again, recommit to the community that we're here to support and assist anything that we can relating to noise. And we're happy to even take a community member up, as we have in the past, to demonstrate these patterns and show them the sensibilities or lack thereof to maybe some of these ideas that might be tossed around. So I'll leave it at that and hold some comments for another topic. Thanks.
Mr. Johnston, thank you. We have one other person in the queue, but Ms. Filkins has already spoken on this item. So Anna has a comment to read, and just as a reminder, the comments are limited to 250 words, so they're untimed. So,
this comment is from Rita Weingarten. It reads, I live in Oxnard Shores, and as I write this, we are on hour 4 of constant airplane noise over our home. It's maddening to say the least, which is why I decided to send an email as opposed to talking at the Zoom meeting tonight. I'm angry. We have a very real issue with excessive noise from airplanes flying over our homes. Most every day, every 2 to 3 minutes for hours on end. There seems to be an overall disbelief among many people on the airport commission. During the last meeting on April 8th, I watched eyes rolling, a sense of boredom, eating and drinking during the entire meeting, especially while the public made comments about the noise levels we are experiencing. It's like living in a war zone minus the bombs. We have decibel readings between 70 to 95, which is equivalent to a vacuum cleaner, food blender, and motorcycle. This is unacceptable when you have to listen to it every single day. The residents of Ventura County deserve better than for this commission, and frankly, our county supervisors allow free touch and go airplanes to come here from out of our county and cause such a noise nuisance that many of us are considering selling our homes. It is obvious that the voluntary flight pattern is being completely ignored, and it seems as if it doesn't even exist at all. This should no longer be voluntary, but a rule. Thank you. End of comment from Rita Weingarten.
All right, and Chair, we have no other members of the public who wish to speak.
Okay, thank you. I will resume our comments. Mr. Perello, I believe you had your hand up next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As an Oxnard City Councilman, along with Councilman Lopez and the former Councilman Carmen Ramirez, a couple of questions. specifically because this is Oxnard. Number one, the statement I'd like to make. I'm very impressed that this has come this far in the engagement of the discussion. I will share with you the fact that I did attend the meeting that the airport had at the Oxnard Airport, where they had the training schools in attendance, and we had individuals from the FAA explaining who controlled the air once the wheels got off the ground. And they also explained it, and Mr. former board member of this agency, Mr. Walter Calhoun, mentioned the fact about the speed discrepancies of planes coming out of Camarillo and the turning right issue. I'm not a pilot. I make no bones about it. When I get in an airplane, I expect to step out of the airplane when it safely lands on the ground. I don't want to be the cause of any parts falling out of the sky. But I think these issues discussed tonight are good, but I also think that the issues that were brought up by the FFA and Mr. Calhoun were valid, and I hope that we're going to not forget those issues. The other question that I have is coming again from Oxnard, biggest city in the county, 70% Hispanic, large population doesn't speak English. Are these things going to be printed in Spanish? I have no idea if there are only Spanish speaking pilots. I would imagine there are, and I would imagine the affluency of the community coming up, they have the ability to go through training. And I might as well ask it. I know that may not be, enjoyed, but I'll tell you what, my other council members and past council members, I believe, would be asking the question if I hadn't. So those are my questions. I'd like to add that. I'm very impressed that we're moving forward to this issue, because having ended representing on the Oxnard Council, the Oxnard Shores area, I would like to tell everyone there are times, having been involved in racing craft in the past, not airplanes, that it does sound like a speedway. And you will look at the planes and it's like the same guy going around and around and around and around. And I can definitely see how people become very short fused. And to my comments, Chair, thank you.
Mr. King, I think you're next.
Thank you, and good evening to everybody. I, on a positive note, would like to add that I've recently been invited to present the concerns in the Oxnard Camarillo flight friendly programs on a couple of upcoming webinars in April. And one comment on Mr. Perella or Councilman Perella's last remark in regard to Spanish speaking pilots. All US pilots, in order to hold a certificate, are required to speak, read, and write English, and it's a universal language by control towers and air traffic control. But
thank you very much. I appreciate it, Mr. King. Thank you.
Yeah, but I did want to announce that I've been given this opportunity to present the material, and if the board's good with that, I'd like to be able to do that on April 18th, 19th, and I think possibly the 20th. It's two or three different webinars that are pilot controller forums targeted at Van Nuys, Long Beach, some of the other busier airports. I don't know if Santa Monica's in there or not, but we'll be able to get our information out to the pilots and hopefully improve the situation of airplanes coming from out of the area. Thank you very much.
Do we have anybody else that would like to speak? Okay.
Nobody from the public.
Okay. I'm just going to add my comments that I think this is really, really good work. And I'm wondering if once these are finalized, I'm sure there's got to be like a list of flight schools, regional, that we could probably send out to help get out to, the pilots that aren't originating from Oxnard or Camarillo, respectively. So, and also just to some of the public comments, this agenda item is about this report format, but I don't want you all to feel that you haven't been heard, and we understand your concerns. And I think they're being addressed in other ways, just not necessarily at this agenda item. So if there's not anything else, I'm going to, is that enough direction for you?
Chair, it is at this point, again, this is something that we're looking for feedback, and you are correct. We would expect to bring this in our Camarillo document back, at least for one more look. Hopefully next couple months. We'd like to get it out as soon as we can, but obviously we want to take the appropriate amount of time to get that input. So expect a more refined version with some of the input we heard today at the Aviation Advisory Commission and from our public pilots and the public. So in the next few months.
Both airports.
Yes.
Okay. If there's nothing more on that, then we will move on. And that brings us to D. I'm so excited for this. And this is the approval of the revised form hangar lease agreement. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll just let you guys take over and give us your report.
Chair, well, I agree with your excitement. I do want to recognize, some folks long before my time, Scott Bear, John George, Mark Karnick. Those are folks associated with Cohoda over the last, this is an 8-year process. Airport staff, directors before my time, in particular, Tom Temple with County Council, who's been through at least 3 or 4 airport directors and some changes. But we're finally at a point where all sides concur. We have at least a document. And again, I'll run through quickly some of the highlight, the terms, 20-year, there's no reversion, subletting is allowed at this point, transfer and assignment, 6 months to replace your aircraft. Some things are allowed to be stored consistent with FAA guidelines, additional aircraft, you can read through the rest. But these are the highlights, again, kind of negotiated over the last 8 years. And I'm just proud and happy that we're at this point. I want to thank this authority, this board for the work and input they've had over the years, given some direction. So that's kind of all I have. We do have a member of Cohoda that would like to give their thoughts as well. If when appropriate, I don't know if it's next or you want to have comments or questions first. You tell me.
You're muted, Susan.
Thank you. Let's have him speak now and then we can comment.
Was that for Dave Timms?
Yes.
That is.
Okay, Dave Timms here. And I'm a member of the Camarillo Oxnard Hangar Owners Tenants Association, a member of the board of directors. Normally, our president, John George, would be speaking this evening, but he flies for American Airlines. And at this time, he's sitting in the captain's seat of a Boeing 787 en route to Madrid. So I'm kind of filling in for him. I'm proud to be able to say that at this point we are in favor of the proposed lease agreement. And I'll try to go over some of the highlights within the lease agreement, although it's 22 pages long and I only have so much time to speak on it. And you'd probably be bored besides, but for page 2, hangar owners benefits, it's like Director Freitas mentioned, it's a 20-year term. We do have subleasing. That's a very important part of it, of our lease agreement, because if you no longer have your physical, if you no longer have an aircraft, you've got empty space in the hangar, and I'm sure, and there are lots of other aircrafts that would like to use that space. There's a shortage of hangar space at both airports, and if you can sublease usable space, that's a real advantage. Multiple aircrafts in a hangar. Again, if there's room, I believe that we should in fact be able to put a second aircraft in a hangar. And I think we've been doing that in the past, and it's a benefit to be able to put additional aircrafts in a hangar where you do have this space. Aircrafts under construction. The FAA has a policy that aircrafts under construction are in fact an aviation activity. It wasn't long ago that it was not permitted to have aircrafts under construction, but now it is a formal FAA policy to permit aircrafts under construction. And that is now permitted in that lease agreement. And with the aircraft under construction, you do have to show progress. You just can't sit the aircraft under there in the aircraft and not show progress. So you do have to meet in progress. Next slide. Procedure for approval and oversight. The lease agreement provides that to be a tenant in the hangars, you have to show that you in fact have an aircraft and that you own an aircraft and you'll have that aircraft in a hangar. And from time to time, there'll probably be inspections, and that sounds reasonable. If you're going to have a hangar on the airport, it should be for an aircraft or aircraft usage. Detailed insurance coverage. We have to have a policy that covers the liability that you may incur for any accidents in the hangar. And that's $1 million policy. And on the policy, it will include the county as being insured. So that's reasonable. And most of us do in fact have liability insurance. So that's not an inconvenience for the hangar owner. Codifies aeronautical use of the hangar. Again, if we have a hangar, we should in fact be able to use that hangar or we should be obligated in fact to use that hangar for an aircraft that's airworthy or an aircraft becoming airworthy. Required security deposit. There's a 1 month security deposit in the lease agreement. When you sign the lease agreement, you have to put up an additional 1 month security deposit. And that's reasonable. Most insurance policies, most lease policies do in fact have a security deposit. So if you miss your rent, at least that's covered by the security deposit. If there's any damages, the airport feels like they have the security of being able to draw from that deposit. Next slide. Curable and not curable defaults. Well, curable default may be something in the order of you didn't make your month's rent payment, or maybe your fire extinguisher wasn't inspected to date. Non-curable would be something such as perhaps a business operated out of the hangar, or maybe an exaggeration might be that the hangar is being used as a meth lab. So in between, there may be not as well defined of what's curable and what's not curable. And there also may be a consideration towards how would you mediate that, or if the Department of Airports said you have to do something to your hangar and you have an objection. So now we've been able to have a binding mediation clause, and it's well defined, the process of mediation. It's a real benefit because we don't want these defaults or whatever occurs to end up in court. Up until this point, it was sort of the county's opinion that if you have a case to argument, argue it, then you can do it in the unlawful detainer court. Well, that's not a very good policy, I don't think. I think that we should stay out of the unlawful detainer courts. And by having a non-mediation provision in the lease agreement, we can settle these out of court. Long-term partnership. Well, this has been a long process. I've been involved with it for over 6 years. I'm happy now that we're nearing the end of it. And I think that the work we've been doing with Director Freitas and the contributions that Scott Bear made when he was president of the Hangar Owners Association, and the efforts that John George is putting into it. I think all these parties have come to be able to support each other and an agreement. I think that in long term, I see that we will have a long-term relationship for the benefit of the airport and the aviation community and the community also. Next slide. I would like to thank the people that I've been calling at the Department of Airports. Typically, I speak to Anna and her partner, I forgot her name, but I always get good results there. I have a good working relationship with the Department of Airports, and I'm proud at this time to say that I represent the Cahoe Board of Directors. The Board of Directors has voted unanimously to support this lease agreement. And I'm happy to be a part of it. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Mr. Timms. I think what we'll do is just go to our comments, and if people have questions for you, then you can stick around and jump in. Okay, so I believe Mr. Bear, you had your hand up first, and Mr. King, did you want to speak again, or was your hand up from last time?
I don't need to speak again except to answer questions.
Okay.
And
Go ahead.
Mark King, I don't need to speak. Let me lower my hand.
Okay, so Mr. Bear, you're up.
Well, Chair Santangelo, thank you. My hand has been up for several years, and I appreciate the time to make some comments. It's been a years-long, winding, difficult, and contentious road to get where we are today on the brink of having a new lease agreement that's acceptable both to the Department of Airports, the county, and the private hangar owners. And there are a lot of people who need to be recognized for their efforts on this lease. And first, I want to thank the various members of the airport authorities. Supervisor Long and her chief of staff, Brian Miller. Brian was just outstanding representing Supervisor Long in this process. Supervisor Ramirez, Camarillo Mayor Molche, Vice Mayor Santangelo, Councilmember Craven, now Oxnard Mayor and former Supervisor Zaragoza, Oxnard Council members Perello and Lopez, former Oxnard Mayor Flynn, public members Fussell, and former public members Thomas, Hodson, and Calhoun. It's a long list, and I know that when I was with the Hangar Owners Association, I spoke with all of you to discuss the hangar lease issues, in many cases more than once, and I'm very grateful for the time you spent listening and considering these issues. By allowing the parties the time to work through the various issues, the end product is something that everyone can be proud of. It was a long haul to get where we are, but the time and effort has been well worth the end results. I also want to recognize Keith Freitas again. Director Freitas has been in place less than 6 months and accomplished what 2 previous administrations could not do in several years. He worked with the hangar owners in a cooperative, collegial fashion, and with his leadership, a deal was hammered out. And a key piece to this was when the hangar owners retained attorney Leslie McAdam. She's with the Ferguson case law firm in Ventura. And with her steady guidance and negotiating skills, she was able to work with county council to find common ground and reach agreements on issues that had been contentious for a very long time. And lastly, I want to recognize my friends and former colleagues in the Camarillo Oxnard Hangar Owners and Tenants Association, COHOTA. Its board of directors placed its trust in what I called the dream team to work with the county to get an acceptable lease. And through hard work as volunteers over several years, they got the job done. Dave Timms, who you just heard from, Gene Barlow, John George, and Mark Karnick. Bravo, guys, and a job well done. I'm proud to plan to vote in favor of this lease when the vote is finally taken. Thank you.
Supervisor Ramirez.
Thank you. I just want to also add my thanks to all the people that Mr. Barra mentioned. And I'm so pleased, especially about the mediation clause, which seemed to be the huge stumbling block that, you know, I think it's very important people have opportunity to try to resolve issues without having a judge do it, because there's usually, it looks like there might be a winner, but usually there's not two winners. There's usually somebody loses and sometimes both. So I'm very pleased about that. And thank you all for making it happen. Thank you, Mr. Temple and Ms. McAdams. She's not on the call, but she did a great job for all of us. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Freitas, too.
Supervisor Long.
Thank you. I completely agree with those who have spoken so far, with Scott Bear and Carmen and everybody. This 8 years long of just hard work to get this done. I'd be amiss to say Tom Temple, who's been, I think he's the longest standing of the county staff who has been here with all the changes in our directors and other staff. And just wanted to say thank you to COHOTA for being a strong advocate for our pilots, to make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's. This can has been kicked down since the beginning. And it's a lot of work and a lot of trust between groups to make sure that this gets done in the correct manner. And I wanted to say thank you to our advisory board here today. Also, this is monumental. There has been a lot of support for this, our airports. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for working so hard. There's a lot that we don't always say at board meetings, because it's more like, no, we need to go back to the drawing board, or no, we have to go back to work on certain things. And it doesn't need to be aired out in this board. But I'd like to say thank you also to our cities, making sure that we have a great partnership with our cities, our counties, our airports, and our constituents to have the best airports we possibly can. And that's the basis I think we've all been working on. And wanted to just say really a thank you. And at any time, I would love to motion to approve this. So thank you.
Mr. Perella.
Thank you, Chair. Number one, I'm very, very proud to say that I'm extremely grateful Mr. Timms is the one giving this report. Mr. Timms, when I first came on this board, was the individual that took the time to sort of show me around, shepherd me, answer some questions. He didn't lobby, he just the facts straight up. Yes and no questions, answer, no games. Mr. Timms did a good job. David, thank you. I would like to also echo the comments that were made, but I as a member of this board for some time, along with Mr. Fussell as an alternate member of the public, and Ms. Long, we've sat through some very contentious meetings on this matter, and I'm very grateful that it's this point. But I can only speak for myself on this matter. There is a new director, and he's done a tremendous job. And as he's mentioned, there was work done before he got here. But I want to say this because I will not sleep well at night unless I do. The previous directors of the airport authority took orders from up and high. And when these decisions became very contentious, they gave the information that they were given from the orders up on high. And then, in my opinion, in plain English, they had their legs cut out from under them. and then they had to come back again. And we do find out, having some lawyers in the equation, paid lobbyists, sometimes hired guns. When people know the law, things can happen. And I want to share the fact that this is concluded with the previous deceased general manager and the previous past general manager that moved on. I think they deserve credit because we have no idea the things that they faced from their bosses. But again, this is tremendous for the organization. Peace is a great thing. And I don't know what else I can say about that other than, David, I'm really glad you got to present this because I know this has been trying on you, and I'm very happy for you. But I'm happy for the organization because having sat through a meeting specifically with Supervisor Kelly Long when there was sheriff's escorts, those were really barn burning. I mean, Oxnard couldn't hold a candle to that. And we've had some contentious meeting in Oxnard. So thank you very much, Chair, for letting me speak.
Mayor Milche.
Well, I will try to be brief. I know this has been a long time coming. A lot of starts and stops and a lot of contentious rhetoric and discussions and negotiations. And I just want to say I appreciate all the work that's gone on from a lot of different parties. This will be an easy vote in that all the parties involved, the county, Department of Airports, and the members of CAHOTA have already mutually agreed to this lease language. And so from my standpoint, it's quite an easy vote. But it's really good that this doesn't need to be a contentious vote, that we have all parties in agreement when, now that it's all come to a head. So I just want to thank all the parties involved. Keith, I want to thank you and your staff, county council, and the members of CAHOTA. There was a lot of work from everyone. So thank you very much.
Mr. DiBenedetto.
Okay, briefly, I know it's been a long, hard road for a lot of people, a lot of past people that had worked on this, and that everybody has done their best. I read the lease agreement. I'm not an attorney, but I really don't have too many issues with it. Just a couple of points of order with it that I was a little bit concerned with. One is the term. I think 20 years is quite a long time. I think you could have a shorter lease term with options. When you have a 20-year term with a sublease clause, can become a annuity for the leaseholder and not really benefit that many other people that are looking to get aircraft hangar space. So that's one issue. The other is that and this other issue may in fact have been taken care of, and I think Mr. Temple could speak to it, or maybe he has, or maybe all of you know. I would expect that there would be some exclusions on who could have a lease relating to the advisory board or the authority board having leases, those that make policy being able to benefit from the lease. And that would include anybody associated with those two boards. So other than that, I don't have any issue with it. It's not going to matter what I think anyway. And I think everybody's worked real hard, and I think you're probably relieved to get something everybody can live with. So that's all well and good. One real quick point of order on my first comment on the advisory board to Supervisor Ramirez. Her appointee, Mr. Tannehill, was the only member of the board that objected to the vote being taken and put in nomination on the issue that we discussed earlier. So just so she knows. Thank you.
Dr. Fussell.
As I promised, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. As I promised, I said I would reserve my remarks until we actually got to the point where we would be able to vote approval, and I intend to. But I want to go back several years. We worked very hard on this issue, and it's been dear to my heart because I own a hangar and an airplane. And contrary to the last guy who thought that should be a conflict, I think it helps for people who are involved to be able to participate in the process. And Dave Timms goes all the way back to the beginning, and I work closely with him and Gene Barlow and all of the past airport directors. And it's been very contentious at times, but I think it just shows that persistence and goodwill usually will wind up very positive. And Scott Bear came on a little later on and did an excellent job, as well as John George. And I just want to thank everybody who was involved, and this is a great day and a great night, and I intend to vote for this lease. Thank you.
Mr. Perello, did you want to speak again?
Yes, I appreciate the individual's concern about the lease with 20 years, and he may have a point there. And I do appreciate his thing about somebody serving on the airport advisory, the airport authority, personal benefit. But I need to explain this. I don't know how to fly an airplane. I can drive a car. I don't know how to fly a plane. And if it hadn't been for people that know how to fly the planes, just as Mr. Fussell has mentioned, being on this board, I don't believe we would have gotten very far. There were oftentimes simply elected people, and all the elected people do, and no disrespect to any electeds on this board, they look to get reelected instead of look public safety and what's going on and how things work at the airport hangar. The people that have the planes and personally involved, there could be a perception that they do have a personal interest, but I can't speak for them, but I can speak for myself. I assume that anybody on the airport hangar authority has to file the same paperwork about conflict of interest that I do. And if they don't, again, the county council needs to get an answer to this member of the board if they do or they don't, because that's supposed to be a given. You have to explain if you have a conflict of interest, because the gentleman's point is absolutely correct. People that have a conflict of interest, they should be barred, but not in this case. Not in this case. Imagine if we had no one that owned an airplane or had a hangar have any interest in this. Imagine what this thing would look like. Thank you, Chair, for letting me speak again.
Mr. Bear.
Just as a point on the conflict of interest issue, several years ago when we were meeting in person, it seems like a lifetime ago, in the Camarillo City Council chambers, the former county council, I think it was, did a presentation on the ethics issue. And I specifically asked him, and he specifically responded that those of us, because we have a month-to-month lease at this moment, we don't have conflicts in voting on the new lease agreement. And so I think that's an important point to point out to blunt any perception that hangar owners on this authority, on either of these authorities, have conflicts when they vote on this lease.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any comments to make? I'll just throw in my own. You know, it's super frustrating when you're going through it, but when you're at the end of a process like this, you can at least look back and know that because of all the time and all the effort, you know, we have an end product that is something we can be really proud of. So I just want to thank everybody that's been named and everybody's hard work, tenacity, and perseverance to get this done. And with that,
I'll motion to approve.
I'll second it heartily.
All right, so we have a motion from Supervisor Long and a second from Mr. Bear. Can we have a vote, please?
Yes, for Camarillo Airport Authority, Supervisor Long?
Yes.
Supervisor Ramirez?
Yes.
Mayor Moshe?
Yes and yes.
Great. Chair Santangelo?
Yes.
Vice Chair Bear?
Happily and gratefully, yes.
Wonderful. That motion passes unanimously.
Chair Lopez, do we need a motion for both, right? Yeah.
Okay. Anyone?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Chair Perello, a motion by Chair Perello, second by Dr. Fussell. Can we take a roll vote, please?
Yes, for Oxnard Airport Authority, Supervisor Long?
Yes.
Supervisor Ramirez?
Yes.
Councilmember Perello?
Yes.
Chair Lopez?
Yes.
Vice Chair Fussell?
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Something's supposed to happen. There's supposed to be balloons falling out of the sky, right?
You know what? I've got balloons falling in my head. I've got that image. This is an exciting, exciting moment.
This is very monumental, everyone. Just, again, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
So Chair, this is Director Freitas. Next steps, we would ultimately take this now to the full Board of Supervisors for the county, and hopefully with their approval, implement that, which will take some time. We've got more than 220 tenants to get through in a process, but we will communicate that process with them as we progress, and ultimately hopefully get the approval from the board, and keep you updated as we go through it. But thank you all.
Mr. Bear, did you have something else to say?
Just a quick question or a comment for Director Freitas. I just want to emphasize that it is still your intent, I hope, that in the rents and fee schedule, you're going to extend that fee waiver, the 2% fee waiver.
That is correct. We want to give ourselves time to implement, as I just mentioned. So we're looking at a full year is what we're going to be recommending to the board in our updated rent and fee structure.
Great, thank you.
Okay, with that, we're going to move on to item E, which is a presentation regarding landing fees for aircraft operations at the airports.
Thank you, Chair. I will start by giving some background. Back in January, I believe it was Supervisor Ramirez that asked that airport pull together some information background so that we can have a discussion. She had heard, I believe, from constituents about the idea to help reduce noise, maybe implementing landing fees. And I don't know if Supervisor Ramirez wants to add anything to that before I kind of dive into it.
Yeah, basically, as you know, everybody's aware, some of my constituents and our neighbors of the Oxnard Airport feel that there are too many touch and goes, and that perhaps people are coming to Oxnard Airport because from other places in and out of the county, and using it to access without any actual financial benefit to the airport or to the community. So it was expressed by one of my constituents, what about landing fees to make it at least pay, or perhaps have folks really think about it if they're going to abuse the ability to come for free. So that's really what it was about. What's possible? What are the rules? And I appreciate you putting this all together. Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor and Chair, I will let me go through the kind of background and presentation we have set up, Dave. So kind of an overview of what I'll be talking about: landing fees and noise mitigation measures. We'll touch on some of the FAA noise abatement regulations, restrictions. Some of the other things that have been talked about, our Ventura County Airport Enterprise Fund, historical operations. That was important for me. Again, being here less than 6 months, even earlier in this meeting, some of the folks have mentioned that things have really changed. So I want to get a historical perspective of what is happening, what has happened over the last 30 years, aircraft operations and things like that. And then kind of analyzing some of the, last 5 months of noise reports, what that's telling us. And then really getting to some of the things the airport is working to put in place to help us address these issues. So let's kick it off. So the number one issue and challenge that we have is the FAA's noise, Airport Noise and Capacity Act, called ANCA, which was implemented, voted on, and put in place in 1990. What was happening across the country in the 70s and 80s were airports were just implementing new noise restrictions all over the country. And what the FAA realized is, the airports are a transportation system, and these noise restrictions were interfering with interstate commerce and the transportation system as a whole. So in 1990, they implemented some restrictions There was a phase out of the noisier stage 2 jet airplanes. But they also, a big piece of that was any airport post 1990, any noise restrictions prior to were grandfathered in, but any new noise restrictions post 1990 had to go through what they call the Part 161 study. And to put that in perspective of how difficult it is to get through that process and get approval, ultimately you get through it, then you submit your document and the FAA has to approve it. In the last 30 years, 21 airports have attempted it, and only one had a slight, after they had to take the FAA to court, got approval for one of the lighter type jets. And most recent example, at least closer to home, Burbank spent 8 years and $7 million on a 161 study, and ultimately it was denied by the FAA. So that's kind of, if we wanted to change and implement noise restrictions and landing fees as a mechanism to do that, we'd have to go through this process. So we have other challenges. Next slide, Dave, please. Questions, how about landing fees and make airports more self-sustaining, small aircraft landing fees, exception not the standard. So we have, every time we take a federal grant for either of the airports, we are bound by about, I think it's 39 grant assurances at this point. But in particular, grant assurance 22, economic non-discrimination, we couldn't pick out a type or a user to make up these fees or high exceptional fees to do something to that group. Same with the rent and fee structure has to be fair and equitable across the board. So those are things we agree to every time we take a federal grant at either of our airports. And again, how are GA airports typically funded? For the most part, it's our rents and fees. We do have landing fees at both airports, but at this point, they're implemented for aircraft that are larger, 12,500 pounds. That's who we charge for landing fees. But again, smaller airports, typically through their gas, fuel flowage, we're charging, and then their rental landing fees are a part of that, but bulk are the rental of space, buildings, tie downs, hangars, things like that. So next slide, Dave, kind of shows. So we did some research to try to see, what other airports in the area are charging landing fees. And you can't see it behind the Santa Monica, but none of those above. So the only ones in California that we could actually find are the larger airports, which are more typical, that do charge landing fees because they're used to large commercial airplanes landing, and it's easier for them just to charge those fees. You kind of see those structure. Santa Monica is the only one that we know of in California that's a comparable smaller airport. And even across the country, we had some of our neighbors even helping, trying to do some research, and I think we found all of 10 to 15 across the United States. So it's not the standard by any means to charge landing fees. Let's go. So now we move kind of to the economic side of it. Some of the thoughts are, well, Oxnard, runs sometimes at a deficit, and you see here, and this is an important thing to go through. We are an airport system, so Oxnard and Camarillo, we do break out their budgets so that we have accounting for the two airports, but the Airport Enterprise Fund is the two airports together. So we do follow standard accounting practices. So you see Oxnard with a fairly large operating loss, because we follow standard accounting practices and you throw in depreciation. Well, we have expensive things like runways and taxiways and buildings that we have to account for in depreciation. But we're fortunate in that we're a transportation system that gets a lot of federal funding, to the tune typically for a runway or a taxi or large infrastructure of 90 cents on the dollar. So, the showing depreciation, we have to show that, but that's not really fair picture of how the airports operate. And a great example is the most recent runway improvement we did at Oxnard. That was a $14 million project where we would expect to, again, pay 10% of that. So, $1.4 million, but because of the increased assistance from the federal side, we didn't pay any of that. The 14 million entirety was paid on federal dollars. Now, again, remember, it's federal dollars that are paid through the Aviation Trust Fund. Where does that money come from? That comes from everybody who buys a commercial airline ticket, pays into that fund. And that's why smaller airports like Camarillo and Oxnard receive money for improvements, because to keep the air traffic system moving smoothly, you don't want smaller, slower planes landing at LAX, a Cessna 172 in front of a 747. We already have all kinds of traffic delays in the air traffic system already. Can you imagine throwing all of those airplanes in that system? So that's why we get federal dollars to make improvements. So here's a kind of an overview of if you include depreciation, again, the two airports, we run at a surplus. And in the next slide, if you pulled out depreciation, we're way above that. The depreciation is something we have to account for and plan for, but from operating cash and reserves, we're doing quite well between the two airports. So here's cash flows. This is what we have right now in reserves, a little over $11 million, and we're projected to go out. You see in 2025 and 26, we drop all the way down to 8 million. The bottom line there shows a $4 million withdrawal because we were planning to upgrade the Camarillo Airport runway. That's a $40 million project, and again, 10% of that would be about $4 million for us. We could get additional FAA funding, unknown, but that kind of shows. And then the next slide I want to show is kind of important. It's hard to see that maybe, but the first top one is way back in 2017. Our projections, our five-year projections, we expected to have, about 9 million in reserves at the end of that. And you see carrying over one more year in 22, 23, our actual reserves were up to $14 million. So again, with an airport enterprise fund that has a budget of about $9 million and our reserves are in the neighborhood of $12 million, we're financially in pretty good shape. Where that all leads to is, or at least the question is, how would we justify with the FAA some additional fees when we're clearly financially in pretty good shape? Now we kind of move to the historical, as I mentioned, heard a lot about operations, aircraft operations. So for clarity, an aircraft operation is either a landing or a takeoff. And so somebody doing a touch and go, it would be one landing, one departure. That would be two operations. So here, this first slide shows Camarillo. Again, back 30 years, 1990, 1991 was the peak at 221,000 operations. And you kind of see that it's declined over the years, but at least the last 15 or so years, 10 years, been kind of right around the 150,000 operations. So it's been kind of flat, but it fluctuates. The numbers do follow the economy. They do follow, new pilot demand, things like that in the country and the world. So that's Camarillo. And then we kind of moved to Oxnard. Again, peak in the 90s, 1993, 145,000 operations at Oxnard. And now, last couple of years in the 70,000 operations. So that's kind of where they are. And then touch and go operations. Again, top line is Camarillo. Bottom line is Oxnard. Again, they do go up and down over the years. They have not been in the peaks in the 1990s, but Camarillo, around 80,000 operations the last few years, on an upward trend slightly. And then Oxnard below that has been right around 40,000 operations, at least for the last 5, 6, 7 years. And then we get into the noise complaint. So this is a report you've seen from us over the years. And these really help us and will help us as we get to our recommendations and things we're doing to try to mitigate noise. This was from September. You only see one call near Oxnard. We had the airport closed for the runway reconstruction. But I want to point out, we had 12 households in Camarillo. And you can see where those are kind of clustered on the approach end of the main runway. Dave, you go to the next slide. Again, no, airport was still closed at Oxnard. Didn't have anything in October, but still clustered for Camarillo on the approach to the main runway. And then get into November, where we opened Oxnard Airport. So what that tells us, and that will help us as we progress, is you see all the cluster, and that's kind of the left touch and go traffic. So we got two airports, very different issues. For Oxnard, it's touch and go. That's our focus. And again, we had 10 households calling, 15 additional callers that were anonymous, so we don't know their location specifically. And then over at Camarillo, still kind of just the straight in line landing approaches. And Dave, maybe December. Same kind of thing, kind of just reinforces, not really changing. We had some significant individual residences calling. One was 107 calls. One was 42. But still, it's the touch and go repetition that is the focus for us. And then the households at Camarillo, again, the straight in line. So that's that. And then maybe carry through to the final February. Nothing changes for us, kind of the same. So what I wanted to finish with is, the idea of landing fees. I kind of explained some of the challenges we would have. Not that we wouldn't be open to it. We could consider it at some point. I don't think now is the time. I think what we're talking about implementing, number one, is a public information officer, somebody for our airport system that is doing analysis on what is happening at both airports, where they can work with not only the community, but our pilots, our flight schools, and what's the best way to get the information out, not only to those pilots and flight schools at our airport, but at other airports. Some of the folks have said earlier that, they see people coming from other airports. That's normal flight training. That's, all the flight schools at our airports. The pilots don't just stay at one airport. That's how they learn and become better pilots for all of us. So we can go, go to Burbank, go to LAX, and go Santa Barbara and go on a flight. They come, they do flight training, and they fly from our airports to all the other airports. Well, the same thing is happening for those airports. So it's not just everybody coming here. It's a trade. As you learn to fly, you hop from airport to airport, learning your skills. But it's also, it's not just new pilots. It's also 10,000-hour pilots. John George, American Airlines pilots based here in Oxnard, he has to stay current in his airplane here. So he's got to, typically pilots are up every 3 months. They do, by law, need to get 3 landings if they want to carry passengers. But most pilots, even if they're flying by themselves, want to, stay current, and probably every at least 90 days are up doing some sort of flight training. So getting somebody dedicated to that's the first thing. We're working on updates to the website. We're already doing that. The pilot guide was one of the earlier items we had on our list. We're working on that specifically as well. Dave Nafee in our office, as we've talked about additionally before, is implementing new flight tracking that will help that new person identify who's flying, where they're flying to and from, what altitudes, so that we can pinpoint, the education and the training that we need to focus on. And then the last thing is we did submit this year for FAA Part 150 noise compatibility studies for each airport. And that's where we spend significant dollars in the neighborhood of $500,000 at each airport to determine what's the best things we can do and implement to be the best neighbors that we can. and they individually study what other airports are doing across the country and what might fit here. So you heard things like, change the altitude, left traffic, right traffic, all those things will be analyzed and what's the best fit for us with public input, with input from the pilots, the flight schools, all the stakeholders would be a part of that. So that's I think the end of the presentation. Dave, is that the last slide, I believe? And kind of just running through again, objective of the landing fee regulations, economic justification, historic perspective, location, source of complaints, and then actions underway. So that's it. And hopefully that's enough background, Supervisor Ramirez, to start a discussion.
Chair, this is Dave. If you don't mind, Anna would like to read another instructions to the public who wish to make a comment.
If you wish to make a public comment on agenda item number 6E, please press the raise hand button now, or if you're calling in today, press star then 9 to be added to the speaker queue.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's, okay, we have a lot of hands up. Let's start with Supervisor Long.
First, did Supervisor Ramirez want to say anything before we start asking questions? I don't want to overstep.
No, just I like to hear the questions and the answers. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first question I had was, we had a list of airports and there's no fees. And so the reason being is my understanding is you went over the budget, and that's the requirement FAA is stating, is if you are financially viable, then no fees can be requested. I wasn't quite sure about that.
I'm sorry, Supervisor, you were cutting in and out. I missed a lot of that. I apologize.
Do we know why all of these airports have no charges?
The answer to that is it's just not the standard. And I'll give you an example why we charge only for aircraft over 12,005. It's the cost. We pay a company to do that for us, and the fee is expensive. They have a flat fee, and then they have a percentage of collection fee. So it's just not, so to do that, and remember, we do have a landing fee. It's $1.44 per 1,000 pounds. So our structure right now, if we were to do, say, a 172, it would be like $3.50. Well, the cost to recover that $3.50, we might be paying the company to do that for us. Most of the landing fees we found for small airports across the country were in the $15 range. That appears to be the point where you at least you start making money on landing fees.
Okay.
So,
the reason why I have a question on the fee is my understanding is that the touch and goes are a crucial safety matter to make sure that pilots know how to land and how to take off. So for me to put a fee on that is very hard. And so I was trying to quantify the amount of safety that we're training all these pilots versus a nominal dollar or whatever fee. And so I just wanted to get a better clarification on that. Because safety to me is like the number one thing. So I'm not sure why I would want to charge anyone a fee for that.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess that's my statement. The second one, in regards, I was talking to some commanding officers of Navy, Marine, and they said that the touch and goes are so crucial, but that they're also the tower is notified. Is that correct? So they give permission for the touch and goes. Our tower, is that right?
that's correct. I mean, as a pilot, you would request touch and go, and it would be the discretion of the tower. If they had other traffic, they may say full stop landing because they got something else happening. So there is a combination of a request by a pilot and then direction by your traffic. That would be normal.
Okay, then I would then refer to the item we had previously that talked about patterns. And so that would be very helpful for our community to know and to understand for these touch and goes. Is that what that would be used for?
Yeah, I want to be clear that, the patterns that were proposed and things like that, and then as heard earlier, safety is number one. There's no question about it. I don't, even my community members say, of course, safety is number one. It's working with everybody. So it's not only the pilots, it's not only the county and the airport, it's our neighbors, it's air traffic control. I met last week, to kind of talk about that with our new air traffic control manager out at Oxnard. This is a collective, this is a group effort to make this happen. As you've heard multiple times, the community understands, and you've heard the pilots, everybody wants to work together to resolve this. Hey, it took us 8 years to get the lease together. So we're going to work on this. It's going to take us some time, but yes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, because I know we're working on more communication with our community members, but I also just want to make sure that we understand how important and crucial the touch and goes are for our pilots to make sure that they're safe, and that we're doing everything we can to support that. I know we have a shortage of airline pilots. I know that there's training, and we're working with our schools. So that's where my questions are coming from, is to support all. And appreciate this information, because as we are always learning, I appreciate this information. Thank you.
Mr. Bear.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment that I'm impressed by the responsive, deliberate, and thoughtful manner in which the Department of Airports is approaching this, getting input from all the stakeholders. And I just want to emphasize that Supervisor Long touched on it, Director Freitas has touched on it. Safety has to be the priority. And one of the ways, as Supervisor Long just said, one of the ways safety is achieved is by repetition. Takeoffs and landings, traffic patterns, communicating with the controller who's controlling that airport. And so I'm hopeful and confident that the steps that Director Freitas and his staff are taking are going to go a long way towards addressing the concerns of the community. And I'm very supportive of that.
Okay, Mayor Mulchay.
Thank you. I do appreciate all the effort that was put into gathering all this information and presenting this. So hats off to Department of Airports and staff. If the implied purpose is to try to mitigate the noise through the implementation of a landing fee, then I don't genuinely think that'll be very effective. I think it'll be seen as more punitive than anything, without really achieving its desired result. I think there are, as has already been presented, a lot of different avenues, alternative avenues that'll be a lot more fruitful and effective in trying to address the noise issue. And I think we should continue to pursue those. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up is Matt Johnston.
Oh, great. Thanks for the time. I appreciate the comments from Supervisor Long and the mayor, because I think the landing fee is a bad idea. It's the wrong approach. I spoke earlier, but to give you some context, as the president of California Aeronautical University, with locations primarily in Bakersfield, we have a flight center in Oxnard, San Diego, and also in Phoenix. Number one, we live in the Western United States, some of the greatest flying conditions and training conditions around. I want to refer, because it was spoke by Supervisor Long about the training need, and we're trying to train pilots. I'd like to refer all of you to the pilot. It's Boeing Pilot and Technician Outlook 2021 to 2040. There's over 600,000 jobs that will need to be filled in the aviation industry, pilots and mechanics. And I think that as public use airports, and it was mentioned also that there's not a financial benefit for some of the individuals or for the community that's benefiting from individuals coming from the outside. I'd like to put forth that there is a huge financial benefit, some of which Keith raised with the funding that we received from the FAA, all through the efforts that are, through pilots flying commercial and passengers on vacation and getting those fees and taxes. And we need pilots to be able to continue to have those operations so we can collect those fees and get those monies for the smaller airports. I think that it is punitive to take a smaller aircraft, and I think it's somewhat kind of comical when you say $3.50 and taxpayers' monies to collect that would be quite the effort. It costs an individual that's seeking to pursue to become an aviation professional anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000 a year, or $80,000 to get their certificates and ratings to become a commercial pilot. So the fees are already extraordinary. Even recently, we've seen the cost of fuel. So those have a tremendous impact, and we do get, as the airports, you get fuel flowage fees and you get things of that nature that come from usage of pilots locally. But again, to address the pilots coming in from the outside the area, the pilots here locally go to those outside the area airports as well. So we're using their airports as much as they're using our airports. And that's not just the flight training centers, that's all the training that was mentioned for people that need to stay current like myself. So I think it's a bad idea, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness and everything that's going into this and the open communication that's occurring.
Okay, thank you. And I realize that I'm mixing in authority members and public comments at this point. They're all on the same line, so I'm just going down the raised hands. So next up is Mr. Di Benedetto.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, pretty complicated issue. To simplify it, taxpayers are paying and the airport's losing money, and we're inundated with traffic from other airports. I understand the training and all of that. If you get on FlightAware and you look at the landing patterns and the touch and goes in the other airports around the area, it's nowhere near what we have. Camarillo does have a lot of traffic. We have more. And my whole thing is, look, any board, any advisory committee, any commission, all have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers. You can set the rate, whatever it needs to be, so that the taxpayers can recoup some of their loss. It doesn't have to be $1,000, but it certainly has to be more than the collection fee required in order to collect the fee. So, this is something that we can work with, and hopefully we will work with it. I will point out one interesting note on this, and that is in March, we sent a spreadsheet with FlightAware links and aircraft tail numbers and registered owners' names to various members. Some of you on this panel received that. In 3 weeks in March, there were well over 300 flights, not loops, not revolutions, but flights that were in the noise abatement area that were doing touch and goes. And the number of revolutions in the noise abatement area was extreme. It was in the thousands. There's a lot going on here. And I agree, I don't think a landing fee is going to be all that much as far as reducing the traffic. But at least the taxpayers wouldn't be losing their shirt on this airport if some money was coming in. And I think flying is an expensive hobby. You own an airplane.
Step down. Did you hear that?
What? Can somebody ask Ms. Filkins or whoever's talking to wait her turn?
Yeah, I think we need to make sure everybody is on mute if you're not talking.
And my point is that it's not necessarily a deterrent, but it will save the taxpayers some money. And we are losing money on the airport. Thank you.
Okay, next up is, all I have is a first name, Susan, and I know it's not me, so. Are you there? Susan, did you want to speak?
Hi there.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, here we are. I live in Oxnard Shores, and I've been here 2 years. I work from home. I have a great bunch of neighbors, a lot of them homeschooled, and I have been to the airport. I have spoken to the FAA and Van Nuys, great gentlemen. I've spoken to pilots, and the reason I went out to search this, and I hear a lot of word salad, and we're kind of doing this and we're kind of doing that, with all due respect for everything you guys have on your plates. But we're kind of just trying to survive, make our own living, school our kids, and not have the anxiety of having buzzsaws over our roof at times that are 120 seconds every plane comes. We have had to shut down birthday parties and bring them inside. We can't have a Sunday brunch or a dinner, but more importantly, you talk about fiduciary. I have had to shut down business when these planes come over in the middle of recording important information. It's that bad. What I'm looking at, I've seen pilots tell me that our control tower has told them, go to the shore, don't turn before Edison. So they do it. And they do that to accommodate more than 1 or 2 planes. But what we get is we'll get 3, 4, and 5 planes constantly all day. Not only is it anxiety and nerve-wracking, fiduciarily, I mean, talk about safety, fiduciary, we're getting fuel dumped on us. We're getting noise and low-flying planes to where it's altering lives of thousands of people that live in this community. And all I'm hearing right now is about the economics of the airport, or we're going to kind of do this, or here's kind of a spread, or here's kind of a that. Why don't we just hit the flight schools up? Nobody's flying friendly. Since that was inaugurated, it's a joke. It got worse. I mean, do we need a banner to say, hey, jerk, turn right, leave our neighborhood? You have a flight pattern. If you look at the flight patterns, you see the scrolling over and over and over and over and over and over and over our roofs, and we've had it. So it should be easy. We either form a citizens group with attorneys to go to the EPA and get all the fuel that is illegal dumping on us that we have to accommodate driving cars, and the hazard of this constant interruption of our lives. It's a matter of just freaking fly friendly. Get on board. It's these schools. To me, all this conversation, and we're going to look into it, gets down to flight schools cooperating.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Perillo.
Thank you very much. I'd like to, this is the area that I represent on the Oxnard City Council, but I'd like to ask a question of the staff. Say the most recent month that you have figures, and it looks like on your slide, and I couldn't get the picture. I think it's the one of the slides, the title of the slide is, damn it, come on. The title of the slide is Airport Activity 1990 to 2020. And it says touch and go operations. The most recent month that you have, why do more people apparently do touch and goes in Camarillo than in Oxnard?
The question is, why do more people do touch and goes in Camarillo?
And then in Oxnard, it looks like your orange, if whatever that number of that slide is, you have the orange line above the blue line.
Yeah.
They're not on top of each other. They're indicating one's of greater volume. Why do more people do touch and goes at Camarillo? If this is touch and go operations, the title of your slide.
Yeah, so this just shows, and the bottom line is, and you saw the previous charts, Camarillo does about twice as many operations overall than Oxnard.
But I'm not asking about overall. I'm asking about touch and go operations, which is the title of your slide. Why do more touch and goes take place in Camarillo than in Oxnard?
I think it's just a numbers. There's just more operations, and of those, there's basically the FAA counts 2 ways: itinerant and local. A local is a touch and go, somebody who's staying in the pattern, and itinerant is somebody who just came in or just left the area. And overall, Camarillo does more operations and they do a greater percentage, it's almost 50-50. It's close to that. Local and itinerant. So it's the same for both airports. Camarillo just does overall more operations. They do overall more touch and goes than Oxnard.
And the reason I'm asking the question, I would think that there would be more people interested in the concerns about the Camarillo Airport touch and go activities than have been expressed in other meetings, including this one tonight. I can tell you that some of the comments that are made by the public, I take with a grain of salt, but I can tell you, I don't live in the Oxnard Shores area, but as I mentioned earlier, there are occasions that I am there. It is the equivalent of the Ventura racetrack at the fairgrounds. And it's the same planes. And I'm not anti-plane, but if there is a method that they can be sent further out so their noise is not over one specific neighborhood, I think that would be a benefit. The comment with respect to the fuel being dumped on the thing, I would hope to Christ that we're not dumping gasoline on anybody. Can I get a clarification on that?
All I can tell you is it's not normal or standard for fuel to be dumped out of an airplane. That's
okay. Thank you. And at the price of fuel today, I can imagine airplane fuel isn't any cheaper than gasoline for an automobile. So I can't see people wasting the fuel. The last one is when they talk about Oxnard losing money, again, please clarify again for the people that don't understand it. There have been some real balloons floated, including one by an individual that wanted to turn the Oxnard Airport into affordable housing. And I mentioned to him, we just spent $14 million on a runway. And I'm speaking as an Oxnard council member. Well, we can always get a bond and repay the money back. I'm totally against that. But you need to explain again, the airport activity is treated as an enterprise fund, not one against the other. Because my understanding is there's potential for looking for commercial flight traffic into Oxnard. Because I'm getting residents asking, when is the Oxnard Airport Authority going to start coming to the Oxnard City Council and hold their meetings there? Why does Camarillo get a monopoly on this? I don't have an answer on that. Previous managers had been discussed, but with COVID and everything else going. But one question they're asking is there going to be commercial flights coming into Oxnard? Because they understand the contention that Camarillo doesn't want any commercial flights coming in. And there is a desire for commercial flights in this area. And with two airports able to handle the commercial flights, Camarillo and Oxnard, what is the plan so we can share with the public on this? But the enterprise funds, please answer that question. Thank you.
I'll take that one question just to be clear. We're an enterprise fund. We do not take taxpayer dollars. We are self-sufficient with the 60 plus businesses that we have at Camarillo and the 15 businesses we have at Oxnard. We are self-sufficient. Again, you look at our numbers in Camarillo because it has 60 businesses and a business park has more revenues that contribute into the enterprise fund, but we do not take taxpayer dollars. And again, we're fortunate that we get from the Aviation Trust Fund. Again, people who fly on commercial airlines pay percentage of their ticket tax that comes to do improvements at smaller airports. So we do not take taxpayer dollars other than the ones that come from using the aviation system. And the rest is self-generated by the businesses that we have on the two airports.
Well, I gather I didn't explain my question clear enough. An enterprise fund, please explain an enterprise fund. And please correct me where I'm wrong. An enterprise fund is a standalone fund that pays its own way. But because the city of Oxnard has an airport and Camarillo has an airport not owned by the city of Oxnard or the city of Camarillo, they're owned by Ventura County. And the two airports are under the airport authority. They pool their funds and that's how it is made. It is not that Oxnard has to pay its own way or Camarillo has to pay its own way. Because if that were the case, we had a gentleman, Aspen Helicopters, earlier. Am I to assume that if we were going to look to have Oxnard pay its own way, we're going to jack up the costs to the gentleman that owns Aspen Helicopters, a tremendous business in this county, so that Oxnard pays its own way? Or do we go back to my understanding of how a county runs an enterprise fund? They pool it and then they come up with a number. Am I right or am I wrong?
That's generally correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Supervisor Ramirez.
You know, I'd actually like to hear Mr. Bearer first.
Mr. Bear.
Thank you, Supervisor. Thank you, Chair Santangelo. I just wanted to respond to a couple of things that Councilmember Perello said, and also the resident of Oxnard. With regard to dumping fuel, I'm unaware of any small plane that has the capability to dump fuel intentionally. If something leaks or whatever, that's a different story. But in terms of pushing a button and dumping fuel, I'm unaware of any small Cessna or small Piper or comparable plane that has that capability. With regard to the fuel, the comments that were made about fuel, the FAA is slowly, but it's happening, transitioning from leaded fuel, low leaded fuel, which is the standard right now, to unleaded fuel. Unleaded fuel will soon be the standard. So in terms of the comment about going to the EPA and making complaints, that ship is already sailing in terms of unleaded fuel being the future of general aviation. So I hope that that helps educate a little bit in terms of what people are hearing and repeating.
Thank you. Supervisor Ramirez.
Yes, thank you. Well, as you can see, this is not a simple issue of let's charge and people will think twice about coming to Oxnard to do touch and goes. But I just want to say to my colleagues here and people who spoke and the folks in aviation, I have a nephew who's a pilot, having learned that from a stint in the Army, and he is looking for work. He doesn't live in California, so that I can't send him to the local agencies to get work. But you can see what the issue is for someone who is an elected official who represents a constituency who lives, and very many people have complained to me, and I'm sure to my colleagues on city council about noise. I've heard this when I was on city council in Oxnard about noise, about safety concerns, and the concern is leaded fuel just in the air, not necessarily dumping like we hear about sometimes from the large jets. So how do we handle this? I don't feel it's appropriate to just say, I'm sorry, Susan and others, it's just too bad you live in the wrong place and you're gonna have to put up with it. That's not the appropriate response for an elected official to a constituent or a group of constituents. On the other hand, I recognize people do need to be trained as pilots. We are depending on safety and training for our pilots. So where do we find that balance so that people can live in peace, accept a little bit of disturbance, but not the kind of thing we're hearing about, that I'm hearing about all the time? Because we do have to listen to our constituents and find some sort of balance. So I really do appreciate the report, Mr. Freitas, and all of your staff that put it together. You know, we can see it is not something that we could just decide we're going to do this or decide we're not, because we do have to pay attention to what the folks who live near the airport are going through and how do we resolve at least some of their concern. So that's where I'm at on this, and I thank everybody for all of your comments. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Chair Santangelo, we do have one written comment that we need to read in. I'm sorry, I stand corrected. There are three.
Three. Okay, let's go ahead.
The first comment is from Eleanor Prilly. It reads, I'm writing to urge the board to impose a fee for private planes at the Oxnard Airport. Other airports impose fees. Oxnard should also. It might help with the constant airplane noise we are forced to endure. Thank you. And a comment from Eleanor Prilly. The next comment is from Joe Gosselin. It reads, I would like to comment on the landing fees at Oxnard Airport and the noise mitigation issue. I'm not sure I understand the benefit of allowing touch and go landings from out of county airports. Exactly how does this benefit the Oxnard Airport and, for that matter, Ventura County? We are not generating any fees, and this practice is only causing a horrible noise nuisance. I live in Oxnard Shores and work from home, but I am constantly having to close my sliding glass doors and windows due to the excessive noise. This is a daily occurrence and goes on for hours, with planes flying over my home every 3 to 4 minutes. I hope that the commission will take this issue more seriously and fast track a solution to either redirect the flight pattern or put a stop to the touch and go landings. Respectfully submitted, Joe Goslin. The last comment is from Mr. Walter Hagedorn. It reads, Airport Authority members, at your meeting last month, I noted that despite 18 months of discussion with the Oxnard Airport management, there had been no improvement in the disruption to Oxnard Shores residents caused by the constant touch and go operations. We have provided a spreadsheet with the violations for March 2022. This is for only 3 weeks out of the month. These are only the flights that are violating the fly-friendly map. The final stats were total number of 17 days with flights were recorded. Total number of flights for 17 days equals 329. Total number of rounds for 17 days equals 1,272. Average hours planes are flying per day equals 6. Particularly bad days, March 2nd, 20 flights, 111 rounds, plane overhead every 3.2 minutes. March 6th, 25 flights, 112 rounds, plane overhead every 3.3 minutes. March 9, 22 flights, 109 rounds, plane overhead every 3.3 minutes. March 12, 42 flights, 134 rounds, plane overhead every 2.7 minutes. March 13, 28 flights, 87 rounds, plane overhead every 4.1 minutes. March 14, 20 flights, 85 rounds, plane overhead every 4.2 minutes. March 18, 29 flights, 116 rounds, plane overhead every 3.1 minutes. Many are old, fly low, and are loud with dB ratings as high as 93. The situation has not improved and may have gotten worse. End of comment from Walter Hagedorn, Chair of Oxnard Shores Neighborhood Council. And that concludes the written comments that were received on this item.
We do have a public individual who with their hand up.
Thank you. Barbara Filkins, go ahead, please.
Okay. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. So last Friday, I flew several flights. I flew a public benefit flight over the islands to capture the collared foxes for Nature Conservancy, and then went up to CAU, who I teach for, on a discussion on academic flight related. And then I came home to Oxnard, and putting the airplane away, there were 2 young kids from Oxnard Shores that are related to the person that set us up for a real estate on Grand Avenue in Fillmore. And it was either, no, don't fly them, or we fly them. And I flew them. And the 2 kids were incredibly interested and dynamically innervated on the flight. So the bottom line is, with all the stuff on the, and this is a little bit from the heart, so forgive me. The Oxnard Shores noise, lead, effects on our students. I might be held responsible for the fact that I flew them in an old 172 with a history and unleaded fuel. And they basically went, oh my God, I love it. So my comment is, in terms of Oxnard, we have a resource that allows the dreams and the aspirations of the next generation. To shut that down in response to some of the problems we're facing is not necessarily going to solve the problem either of us, Ventura County, as a community, or us as a nation in terms of what we're going to do for the next generation. So I would say, just think about that as you move forward. End of comment.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkins. Unless anybody else has a comment, I'm going to throw in mine for what it's worth. I'm trying to bring this back to, this is about landing fees. And I don't think landing fees are the way to address the noise issue, which I think is really when you whittle it down to what we're talking about. And I just have to share a little bit. You know, I was married to a pilot who wanted to fly for the major airlines. And back then, when there wasn't a pilot shortage, we spent every last penny on getting him his hours. And it really is expensive to train as a pilot. And it really is that repetitive touch and go that helps you be able to land safely. So I am sensitive to anything that would dissuade people from going into aviation. And it is also true that we have such a pilot shortage. What my son is going to be able to do in terms of becoming a pilot compared to what his dad had to do is just completely changed. So I also know that we've got, you know, we heard a lot of comments about the noise, and I also want to bring us back to the things that we talked about previously in this meeting, that there are some things, some real tangible things that are happening with Mr. Freitas, with you know, a dedicated person to handle some of these things, with doing the noise abatement study and all of those other things that I just feel like somebody needs to say we are doing things, and it just feels like it's taking a long time, and I'm sure it feels even longer when you have planes flying over your head every 3 minutes. So I hear that. So with that, I think we need a motion to receive and file this presentation. Or
so moved.
Second.
I did not hear who moved that.
Perallo made the motion.
Thank you. So we have a motion from Mr. Perello, and was it Mr. Bear with a
I
second?
seconded it. Yep.
Thank you. So let's have a roll call vote for Camarillo.
Chair Santangelo, Councilmember Perallo is a member of the Oxnard Airport Authority. Would this be an Oxnard vote or a Camarillo vote?
So I'll motion for Camarillo.
I'll second.
Okay, so we'll do that again. Let's take a roll call vote for Camarillo.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Long?
Yes.
Supervisor Ramirez?
Yes.
Mayor Molche?
Yes.
Chair Santangelo?
Yes.
Vice Chair Bear?
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
All right, and then Mr. Perello, if we'll take your motion. Is there a second for Oxnard?
So moved.
I will second. So thank you, Mr. Perello. Can we take a roll vote, please?
Yes, Supervisor Long?
Yes.
Supervisor Ramirez?
Yes.
Councilmember Perallo?
Yes.
Chair Lopez?
Yes.
Vice Chair Fessel?
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Right. So the next items are reports and correspondence, which are for us to have. No discussion is needed, so I'm going to move us on to authority comments.
I think we have director's report.
You know what?
one
I
item
skipped
above.
right over you. I'm sorry.
I will make it fast. How about that?
That's all right.
Quickly, Cloud9 update. They received building permits from the city of Camarillo on March 9th, and they received county building permits issued on March 29th. So they are in process and in building as we speak. In the past, we've had a question regarding AVAX and the self-serve island, self-serve fuel island. At this point, because of change of ownership and some supply chain delays, bringing that self-serve island looks like June is what their target is. But good news for pilots is they're offering the same price. If you call them up, they'll bring the fuel truck to you and fill up your airplane. Solicitation went out for 2 properties at Oxnard, a 5-acre and a 7-acre aviation parcels. We expect solicitation interest to be back to us by May 6th. The taxiway connector at Oxnard, which was that second phase of the runway reconstruction, bids open on April 26th. That's somewhere between a $3 and a $6 million project. The question was asked at the the last meeting, I guess it was, is there going to be a commission budget presentation? And after doing some analysis, talking with county council, because of who we invite, we run into some Brown Act challenges. So we're just going to make those briefings one of our regular meetings, not a special budget workshop. And the last is what I mentioned, the air traffic control manager, Roger Green, retired from Oxnard. He's actually relocating to Florida, and Lee Westfall is the interim air traffic manager. And I did make communication with both Lee and the regional manager for the facility to express specifically that we would be looking for somebody that would be willing to work with the community. That was a big deal for whomever they find as a permanent fill for that position. Anyway, that's all I have.
Thank you. Okay, so back to where I was. Authority comments.
Can I ask a question of the director's report, please, Chair?
Of course.
You mentioned 2 parcels at the Oxnard Airport, 5-acre and 7-acre. Are these parcels going to have to go to the Oxnard Planning Commission for any activity on them?
They do not. It's on airport county property. Does not have to go on part of the master plan existence, those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Milche.
Keith, real quick question in regards to Cloud 9. Do you know what now that they have the permits necessary, do you know what their timeline is?
I don't have a specific date. I think they're hoping first or second quarter of next year, I think, is a reasonable timeline. They did have most of their materials in place, but I think opening doors first or second quarter is what they're targeting. I'll give you an update if I hear more about that in the future.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, if there aren't any more comments, that brings us to the end. Thank you, everybody. I know it's been a long night. But Mr. Perella.
Yes, I apologize. My question was for the director's report. I'd like to make a comment, please.
Go ahead.
Okay. I had asked, and I'm being asked by residents in Oxnard, if there are plans or anything in the works to bring commercial flights into Oxnard. And the second thing I'm being asked by residents in Oxnard, when will the Ventura County Airport Authority have a meeting in the Oxnard City Council, as we're a joint organization? And there had been, there had been requests in the past. I understand we've had COVID, but as soon as we're able to go into open meetings, I'd hope that we could have put an agenda that we would at least have one of these events at the City of Oxnard City Hall. That's my only question and comment. Thank you.
Okay. And if that does it, then we will go ahead and adjourn. Thanks, everybody. Our next meeting is May 12th at 6:30. Location to be determined.
Good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Good night.